Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our webinar, How to Build a Comprehensive Succession Plan. This is actually the sixth time we've run this webinar this year, so it's been great to see many people joining this session. And let us know if you want to catch a recap of this session after the fact or share it with your colleague, and we can share a previous recording with you. But today I'm ready to jump in. My name is Dr. Ariena Thompson. My background is in industrial organizational psychology. I have a passion for creating cultures that support employee engagement, building and supporting strong leaders, and creating a culture where everyone can thrive. At Sigma Assessment Systems, I am a senior consultant. I support on succession planning, talent development, and other consulting engagements. So thank you so much for joining. We're excited to have you here. So to give you a sense of the agenda for today, we will start with the basics, including what is succession planning and how does it compare to replacement hiring. We'll also discuss why succession planning is important for your organization and why it may be worth the investment. The next step we're going to talk about is Sigma's evidence-based and researched 6-step process, where we will go into depth about all of the 6 steps in our succession planning process and provide recommendations along the way, as well as recommending templates that Sigma has available to you for free on our website if you are interested in using these templates for succession planning. Then we'll wrap up with some tips on succession planning, including common pitfalls, the greatest hurdle, which is implementation. And lastly, we'll just share a little bit about what it's like working with consultants and how consultants might support you in your succession planning journey. So what is succession planning? Succession planning is the process of identifying and developing internal talent to fill critical roles when vacancies occur. So this is a bit of a lengthy definition in some ways. So I'm just going to highlight a few parts of the definition once again. So it's about identifying talent and then taking action to develop that talent to help them be ready to fill critical roles, so key roles within your organization for when vacancies occur. So you're really preparing people within your organization to be ready to fill upper spots in case leadership shifts happen and there's turnover within the organization. For this reason, robust succession plans share a few core features. This includes being goal-oriented. So we don't do succession for no reason, and identifying what your reasons are for engaging in succession planning is an important part of the process. In that investigation, you can identify goals that are really pertinent to your organization and try to make sure that your process in place supports achieving those goals over time, and also checking in later to see if those goals have been indeed achieved. Another feature is that it is ongoing over time. Sometimes when people think of succession planning, they think of it as a one and done process. It's something that we do and then we're done. But in reality, that's not how succession planning works. And you have to continually come back to your plan, look at it, make sure you're aligned with your strategy, examine whether or not people have left your organization, and it really requires maintenance all the time that you want to be doing it. So once you begin, it's something that you need to kind of keep a pulse on throughout time. And to this point, it also must be flexible to changing needs, circumstances, or priorities. So if your organization goes through a restructuring, you may need to look at your succession plan again. Again, I just mentioned if people leave or join your organization, that's a good time to look at your succession plan and maybe who you have as succession candidates on your bench for any given position. So as an organization is constantly in flow, your succession plan will need to be updated to reflect the current state of the organization. But a good succession plan will accomplish a few different things. First, it will build a pool of qualified candidates for each critical role. We'll talk more about what critical roles are later in the session, but making sure that you have someone in place, in mind, and trained up for any significant roles in your organization will really help you in the future to facilitate smooth transitions and not miss a beat in your organizational functioning. Also, it will provide opportunities for employee growth and development. As inherent in this process is that identification and development of talent. You're going to have to take some time to develop your employees and make sure that they are ready to take on a new position in the future. So this provides them with opportunities to learn and grow and supports them in seeing career paths within the organization. And then lastly, it will increase confidence in a company's ability to fill vacant roles. So over time, as your succession plan is put into place, you're going to have more people ready to go in the case of especially leadership vacancies. And then as you roll succession planning out to your entire organization, potentially anyone in the organization. And you can reduce the amount of time where any given position is vacant, which can really support things going on as they should with no jumps or gaps in your operational functioning due to that person being missing. So to sum this up, succession plans are important because they provide your company with a roadmap for continuity for when changes occur. So we're going to start our first poll of the session. We'd love to hear from everyone who is here. So there's two ways you can join the poll today. You can either scan this QR code with your phone or tablet, and you'll be brought right into the poll. Or you can join at menti.com, menti.com, and you can use the code 13763194. So I'll give everybody a minute to join our polls today, and then you can answer this first question of the session. Does your company have a succession plan today? And you have a few options. You can say, yes, we have a formal succession planning process that is used across the organization. Most our teams are engaging in succession planning, but there is no standardized process. We have a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. We haven't thought about succession at all, or not sure. So again, please join us in answering some of these polls. We'll have some different polls throughout the session for you to engage with. And you can either scan this QR code with your phone or join online with your laptop at menti.com using the code 13763194. We have some answers trickling in here, so thank you for everyone who has joined the poll already. I'm going to give it just another minute or so, just for those who are just still getting situated with the polls to be able to get their answers in. All right, so far we see that a third of our group today feels that most of our teams are engaging in succession planning, but there is no standardized process. And then 2/3 say we have a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. So thank you so much for answering. Appreciate your participation. So next, we're going to talk about the difference between succession planning and more traditional replacement hiring. So replacement hiring is the traditional method of hiring that is done when one person leaves the organization, and then you begin hiring to fill that role. So the timing tends to be reactive. It happens in the moment the person leaves, and that triggers the need to begin hiring. Therefore, the selection, it chooses the best person available at the time, and it usually tries to replicate the incumbent. The source of information leverages usually only input from the supervisor, and if you're lucky, information also from the incumbent if you have been able to source information from them before they leave the organization, which sometimes does not happen. You're just selecting one person to join the team. And the objectivity can be compromised as it is somewhat based on being at the right place at the right time. And therefore, the process is hiring done as needed. So in contrast with succession planning is much more proactive, and it seeks to prepare the best candidate within the organization for the future role. Therefore, you can choose the best candidate, even if they're a little different from the incumbent, as you know what's necessary to have success in the role, and you know that there might be different people who can accomplish this goal. The information is an ideal state leveraging information from multiple sources. So, for example, in Sigma's succession planning process, we get information from the person in the role, often their supervisor, other people on the team, and we can get multi-source feedback on what it takes to have success in that role and how that role contributes to organizational success as well. So in this case of succession planning, you would actually create a bench of succession candidates for each critical role. And this really enhances objectivity as selection and promotion can occur more objectively based on merits, ongoing assessment, and development. And so the process enabled hiring to be more integrated with recruitment, development, diversity initiatives in the organization's life cycle. So we have our next poll question of this session. We'd love to hear, what does your team do? Is it succession planning, replacement hiring, or a mix of both? Starting to get a few answers in. Give it another minute. Would love to hear from you. All right, so what I'm seeing again is a third does replacement hiring. So totally understand that is the most common way of hiring in today's organizations. And then 2/3 say a mix. So it's great to see some of the audience today is engaging in succession planning and is doing a little bit of both. So thanks so much for your response. So why does succession planning matter? The reason succession planning is important, especially today, is that turnover is inevitable in all organizations. And succession planning can help you prepare for vacancies well in advance. And we do know that in today's job market, turnover happens on average about every 2 years. Some organizations are skilled at keeping employees longer term, but at the end of the day, there's different reasons why turnover can occur, from retirement to things happening in people's personal life to others pursuing new and different opportunities. So it's good to be prepared for when vacancies do occur. And doing succession planning in advance will help you to do a few things. Will help you to retain organization-specific information and knowledge. So this is something that tends to be one of the biggest factors and one of the biggest supports of succession planning is making sure that institutional knowledge is actually held and transferred within the organization. And if you do replacement hiring and the person leaves, they take all of their knowledge with them before you can begin to transition it to someone else. Occasionally, there's overlap in the time where one person leaves and another is hired, but that is relatively rare. And succession planning will help you think about what kind of knowledge needs to stay within your organization and be transferred down to the next generation. It also helps to help motivate employees to engage in succession planning and also creates a culture of growth and development. So I mentioned this once earlier in the session already, but I just want to emphasize how important this is. And some statistics show that a lot of today's workers are looking for that career growth, that career challenge, and those opportunities for promotion and growth within the organization. So succession planning helps to communicate that we are interested in you, your growth within the organization, and we're even considering you for future roles and developing you towards that. That can be very motivating and energizing for your workforce. In turn, this can support attracting and retaining staff long-term as your organization seems to be a great place to work where people are invested in and developed. And lastly, succession planning can help you to improve objective decision making. Sometimes in the moment, when we're in an in the moment hiring scenario, trying to address a current vacancy, there can be some stress and pressure. And you might default to trying to hire someone who looks or seems just like the person who was there before. But taking a more strategic, methodical approach allows you to consider all people within the organization, take that time to train them and see where they do excel or not, and really choose the best person for the job. So that can really support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and support just getting the best person into your organization who's going to support your organization the best in that role. All right, now we are to Sigma's succession planning process. This is a 6-step process that is evidence-based and we've used and refined with a lot of clients. So I'm excited to share it with you today. The first step in the process is to identify critical roles. And you'll notice on the right-hand side here, we have a number of templates in this green yellow text. And these are all things that you can find on our Sigma Assessment Systems website. So you can actually go and download a critical role identification questionnaire and investigate some of the free resources that we have available to you. And I'll be talking about each one of these steps in greater depth, so I'll just go over them at a high level. So there's identify critical roles, build success profiles, nominate successors, assess development needs, develop talent, and measure progress. So let's begin with identifying critical roles. The goal at this stage is to identify the roles in your organization that should be targeted as a part of your succession program. So a critical role can be thought of as any role where if that person in the role today left, it would cause a critical and challenging vacancy that would disrupt organizational functioning. So in identifying critical roles, some tips we have is to start with key roles, including upper management and leadership positions. So this is a great place to begin your succession planning. A lot of times when we engage with organizations, we do start with their senior leadership team. Although it's important to note that ideally you will not stop there and you begin to do succession planning for lower levels of management and individual contributor roles as well. Other key roles might include administrative staff or areas with high dependencies or little overlap in skill sets. So you can think at this time and really take some time to reflect on who really is critical to the functioning of my organization. And sometimes it might even be individual contributor positions. For example, if you have a few software developer or engineers working for your organization, helping to create the product that your organization sells, that could be a really critical role to focus on and make sure that you are doing succession planning for that role. So at this time in the process, we recommend you consider both essential people and essential positions. It can get a bit messy at this early stage, especially if you have people who have been with your organization for 20 to 30 years. Sometimes we see senior leaders that wear what we call multiple hats, where they're really essentially filling the role or the position for 2 to 3 positions, and those positions need to be broken up into more positions. So at this time, you really need to consider both the people and the positions, although as we get further into the process, we really want to focus on the position and not the person filling that position. So I hope that makes sense. All right, step 2 in the process, once critical roles have been identified, is to build success profiles. The goal here is to describe the competencies that are necessary to perform each critical role. So tips we have in this area are to create one success profile for each critical role. And there are some things to consider when considering the behaviors that are important for success specifically in the role itself, success in the organization more broadly or on the leadership team, and success both in the role today as well as in the future. So I'm going to give you an example of this to add clarity to what a success profile is. So here's a sample success profile, which has been adapted from one of our clients. A few things to note here is that there are some different criteria or information that would be included on a traditional job description. So you can see that we have some position demographics, we have position criteria. So this example here is for the succession position of an HR director. We'll call the current incumbent Jane Smith for this example. So Jane Smith is expected to have a vacancy and retire in 2024, which makes her a 5-star priority. So the job description information can be helpful, as we know that for an HR director position, it's important to have a bachelor's in HR or related field. The organization's looking for 8+ years in HR, looking for experience leading teams, designing HR programs, having knowledge of benefits and payroll, and the skills to leverage HR software. But then when we see the other columns in the success profile, we see how we also like to focus on competencies, and the competencies needed to have success, both on the leadership team and in the role. So the middle column showcases leadership competencies that this organization would like to see across all leaders. So they would like to see active listening, dependability, and integrity from all leaders in their organization. And there's also some leadership skills that they think would be important going into the future, which in this case was social astuteness and technical orientation. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, we have some competencies that are more specific to this role of an HR director. So we see some competencies here, such as valuing diversity, attracting staff, developing and coaching others, and monitoring and controlling. So these, represent what you might need to accomplish or have competency in order to be a successful HR director at this organization. And then again, we have future-oriented competencies for the role, which include vision and client customer focus. So zooming out once again, I hope this gives you a good sense of what a success profile is, how it describes some of the competencies, skills, and experiences needed in a given role, and can really help you to prepare different candidates towards what they'll need in order to have success in a future position. All right, next is our step 3, which is nominate successors. So at this point, you've already identified critical roles and built a success profile for each of those critical roles. So now you're ready to nominate successors, where the goal is to consider potential candidates for each critical role. Some tips here are to challenge yourself to not only include direct reports, so not to think only of your own team, but to think more broadly and widely, thinking more cross-functionally and thinking about people in other teams or departments. You can also think of it as a leadership pipeline feeding into your role rather than simply selecting the next successor. So at this point, you're only considering who might be a good candidate for your role. And that means that they will become eligible for development and training, but it does not mean that you are at this time selecting the next successor. And that's really important because we actually learn a lot through this training and development process. And at this time, you're just getting people ready for a future role. And so for this reason, you can even consider candidates who might be ready for the role sooner, but also those who might be ready in the more longer term. So people could even take on another position before the one that you're getting to. So I'll show that an example of a succession bench. So this is Sigma Assessment System succession bench template that we use with our clients to map out the different candidates that they have on their bench for each critical role. So again, using the example of the succession position HR director with the current incumbent James Smith, who will be leaving this year, this would be a hypothesized bench for this position. And in this example, the position has 3 succession candidates, and one is in level B and one is in level A. So just to define the levels, level C means the person will be ready in 5+ years. Level B means the person would be ready in 3 to 5 years, and level A would be ready in 0 to 3 years. So we have a couple of level A candidates here. We have Jerry Cole and Katura Zahn. And we also can see when they were added to each stage. So with Katura Zahn here, we can see that she was a level B candidate back in April 2022, but she moved to becoming a level A candidate in June 2023. So this template helps you to track progress over time if different succession candidates are progressing and becoming more ready for the role than before. Both Jerry and Katura are in the current position of being HR managers, and the next position for them would be the HR director. But let's look at our level B candidate, which is Sarah Jensen. Sarah Jensen was added to the bench in June 2023 and is presently an HR lead. So you can see here that there's more information on Sarah because she has a succession path that she would need to take. So her readiness for the next position is about 6 months when she could become then an HR manager. And then after having spent some time in an HR manager role, she could then become eligible for becoming the HR director. So this is just to give you an example of how your succession bench might look, and that there might be people on your bench that need to take on additional positions before they're ready for the ultimate position that you're planning for. And that's okay. And it will really depend on how much time you have until the position becomes vacant. So in this case, it's likely that one of the level A candidates would be chosen simply because Jane Smith is looking to leave the organization by the end of the year. However, if the expected vacancy was 2029 and this person still had 5 years that they were planning to stay with the organization, it's potential that Sarah Jensen could continue to be developed and then eventually be considered as a level A candidate alongside the other level A candidates. All right, step 4. At this point, we've identified critical roles, built out success profiles, nominated successors, and we're now ready to assess development needs. So some tips in this area is to consider what kind of different assessments could be used to assess your candidates. And this can be accomplished by a scientifically validated assessment. So a personnel assessment can be used to help measure and validate the skills of the candidate and ensure that they are a good candidate for your bench. You can also do a 360 review, leverage performance management systems, or other ways of assessing candidate skills. But the ultimate purpose is to determine the strengths and development priorities of each of the candidates, and especially as it relates to the success profile that has been developed. So on the example of the success profile that we had, one of the competencies was attracting staff. So you might see for a candidate on the bench whether attracting staff was an area of strength or development. And if it's an area of development, it might need additional attention and training. Can also validate each candidate's position on their succession bench, and also assessing candidate skills helps to provide a baseline of skill in which we can evaluate development success. So here's just an example of an assessment that we have at Sigma, and this is the LSPR, so it's the Leadership Skills Profile Revised, and it contains all 50 of our leadership competencies and our leadership competency model that we use on our success profiles, and it helps, this is the report, and it helps to showcase the candidate's strengths and development areas. So for example, one of the competencies that was needed to be an HR director was open-mindedness. So I see that this competency is very high for this candidate. But since we don't see some of the other ones, such as the other one I just mentioned, attracting staff, it could be an area of opportunity and therefore development for that candidate. So this is just to give you an example of an assessment that you could use and how it would benefit your succession planning process. Step 5 is to develop talent. The goal here is to use coaching and development and training to take potential candidates and guide their development into capable successors. So at this time, you want to determine the candidate's development priorities, help them find opportunities to learn and practice new skills, and also support them in overcoming obstacles or challenges to successful development. So here's another worksheet that we have that's relatively simple to get our clients thinking about what kind of activities and development activities they would like to do with each of their candidates on their succession bench. So here we have the same candidates again of Jerry Cole, Katurazan, and Sarah Jensen, with Jerry Cole and Katurazan being level A candidates and Sarah Jensen being a B level candidate. And so when we're looking at the plan development activities, you can see that we have noted that Jerry Cole and Katurazan are good candidates for doing job shadowing and executive coaching. And this is because they are those level A candidates. They might be moving into the position sooner than later. And investing in these candidates is likely to have a good payoff if they do indeed move through the organization and become a leader in this role. But for Sarah Jensen, as she is a level B candidate, we have recommended self-directed learning as a more individualized way of growing in her role, so she's ready to take on future positions in some time. However, for all of these candidates, we've also recommended group training, and group training can be really helpful for getting everybody in the same room, talking, thinking, and expressing their development around different topics, especially in the space of leadership development. And it can also help create a culture of development across the organization that is really helping to develop all people. All right, so now we are to step 6 in our process, which is measuring progress. The goal here is to track progress, boost engagement, and quantify success. So some best practices that we have for you today are to think about the best metrics for your own organization. So it also goes back to the point I made earlier in the presentation around having a goal for your succession plan. So what are your goals and what would you like to accomplish? And then what kind of metric can you use to reflect those goals? I also recommend that in the beginning, before you even begin development effort or anything like that, you record these metrics as a baseline so that after developing people and spending time and effort on your succession plan, you can then evaluate progress. So some different examples of common metrics used include rates of turnover in the organization or the percentage of roles being filled internally. I'll give you one more example for the session today on how you might measure progress in your organization. So as Sigma Assessment Systems, we will capture these different metrics at the organization level, at the program level, and also at the individual level. So here's some sample indicators of how you might measure progress on your succession plan. At the individual level here, for this example, we have percentage of employees responding positively to surveys and the percentage of employees who have received assessments. So then you could record the baseline from your existing metrics. And then at the program level, we have number of employees in employee training programs and the number of positions with 2+ viable successors identified. And then at the organization level, we have the percentage of positions filled by internal candidates and the percent of key roles with SOPs developed for smooth transitions. So this just will give you an example of how you might measure different elements related to your succession plan, and then we'd hope to see those metrics increase over time. So for example, at this organization level, maybe the baseline today is 50% of positions are filled by internal candidates, but maybe you could bump that number up to 65% by January. Obviously, we're getting very close to January, so we might need a little bit more of a ramp up time to achieve that, but this is just for example. All right, now we'll talk about some common pitfalls that we see in succession planning. Some of the most common pitfalls include focusing only on the executive level. I did mention that the executive level is a great place to start your succession plan. However, focusing only on the executive level will have you missing out on other roles within the organization, which may be critical to your organizational functioning. And there's really an opportunity to roll your succession planning out to the other levels of your organization, creating a whole organization pipeline where you're constantly planning for who is available to take on this position. And if that person takes on this one, who can take over theirs. And it really helps you to have a whole pipeline of people growing through the organization over time. Another pitfall that we see often is keeping succession a secret. I know this is really tempting for a lot of organizations as it's hard to talk about succession candidates and you feel this tension between telling them about the succession plan but not promising them another role. You want to avoid uncertainty, so you keep it a secret because you don't want people to worry about who's leaving the organization. But really, to the extent possible that you can be transparent and share the activity going on related to succession, the more successful it's likely to be. And it doesn't mean that you have to call it a succession plan. You could call it a talent development program. But as long as some of the key elements are there of we are focusing on you, we want to develop you for the future, we're considering all of our employees for next level roles, that's the kind of way that you can bring people into it without creating any uncertainty in the workforce. Another common pitfall is delegating all tasks to HR. It's great to have HR involvement or even have HR spearheading the initiative, but there needs to be senior leadership buy-in for what's happening. And this is because that piece of developing employees is really critical to the whole success of a succession program. So there needs to be buy-in from all leaders on actually getting vested in talent development, supporting their direct reports, engaging and having the time away from their core role and task duties to actually engage in development, whether or not that's job shadowing or learning or anything else. So it's really great to involve the entire organization, although it's definitely fine to have involvement from HR. But if it only lays in HR, it might not get the widespread impact that you're looking to achieve. The next common pitfall is failing to document the process or update the plan over time. So a lot of organizations will and do see succession planning as a one and done, and they don't think about keeping succession planning as an updating process over time. I was really proud of one of my clients I spoke to this week, and they said that after about a year, they came back and they had all of their leaders look at their success profiles and their benches, making updates based on people who have left or joined the organization. And just doing that once a year is a powerful way to keep your succession plan on track and not to make it some document that's getting dust in the back of your files. And lastly, we have the common pitfall of strategic plan implementation. And this tends to be the greatest hurdle, as statistics show us that 67% of well-formulated strategic plans will fail in organizations due to poor execution. Another statistic shows us that 1 in 3 leaders rate their company as poor or very poor at implementing strategic plans. So I'd love to hear from you now. How successful is your team at implementing strategic plans? Would you say we always follow through on our strategic plans? We sometimes follow through. We create strategic plans, but rarely follow through on implementation, or we don't really create strategic plans at all, or not sure. I'll give it just another minute for anyone who is still completing the poll. Thanks for your participation. All right, so seeing that 2/3 of the audience says that they sometimes follow through on strategic plans, with another 17% saying we create strategic plans but rarely follow through on them, or another 17% saying we don't really create strategic plans at all. So thank you so much for sharing. It's very interesting to hear where the group's at today. So all this to say, companies may take the time to develop a succession plan, but may fail to develop their talent or adequately prepare each candidate for a future succession position. If you are someone who finds your organization or yourself in this position, this is when working with a consultant can help. So working with a consultant, such as our consultants at Sigma, can give you time back. So for example, our succession planning processes have been methodically developed to help save organizations time. We find that time is what our clients need the most and the reason why their succession planning processes fail most often. We can also, though, give you process. As you can see, we have a great 6-step process that is tried and true and has been adapted and improved based on our experiences with organizations facing similar challenges. We also provide accountability. We'll check in, we'll see how things are going, we'll keep your leaders accountable. So by acting as strategic partners, we'll make sure that you are more likely to achieve your goals by keeping that accountability in place. Also, this one that I love is objectivity. Through making unbiased decisions, you can identify the best candidates. And through our workshop and our processes, we actually do see that this works. It's actually not uncommon at all that people will have one successor in mind for their position. But as we go through the success profile, as we look at the true leadership competencies as well as technical abilities of their employees, there will actually be a lot of times a shift in who is the top candidate or who is identified. Someone who maybe was overlooked maybe rises up to the top and moves out someone who was maybe more in a subjective realm, the first pick. So this really can add objectivity, which I think supports the organization in functioning in the best way. And lastly, we can bring expertise by drawing on a lot of experiences of clients who have been in your shoes in the past and facing similar things. So now we'd love to hear from you. What are some of the greatest challenges your team faces, especially in succession planning? Is it time, buy-in, knowledge, standardization, having a dedicated team, or maintaining long-term commitment? We'll wait a bit longer, hopefully to hear from a few more of the voices of our audience. All right, so I'm seeing that a lot of these are emerging. So we see time, knowledge, and having a dedicated team as some of the top factors, followed by buy-in and long-term commitment. So thank you all for your responses. Oh, I see it's even changing a bit, but some of the main areas staying relatively high. Interesting to see that standardization is not as much of a challenge for this group. And we just want you to know that we are here to help. For example, we are offering a new offering of a succession planning sprint, as we call it. And for $9,500, we have a lot to offer. We will give a 4-hour executive strategy session where we will work with your executives on the first 3 steps of our process. So identifying critical roles, also building success profiles and building that bench for your succession candidates. Then after collecting a lot of information, we will do a lot of analysis on our end. So we do the work, we spend the time to get you a customized succession plan, which then we will deliver and prepare for you, as well as suggestions for implementation. If you want other free resources, you should go to the sigmaassessmentsystems.com website or download this Sigma Succession Planning Guide, where we have a guide for you that includes everything you need to build a comprehensive plan. And we also have a lot of other free templates on our website that you can browse and use to get started. And if you have any questions, we'll be wrapping up now. So feel free to ask a question, and I'll stay for a bit to answer any questions that emerge from the group. Thank you so much for your time today. Let us know if you have any questions or reactions from what you've heard today. All right, I'm seeing a few questions in the chat now. First one is, how often should the succession plan be done throughout the year? This will really depend on your organizational context and how big you are, how often people are coming into or leaving your organization. But I would say that it's a good practice for most organizations to do it between every quarter, every 6 months, and every year, the year being the longest. If you have a small organization and people aren't coming and going that often, a year is probably sufficient. If you're really large, checking in on it every 3 months is going to be your best bet. And also keep in mind that ideally there is ongoing development effort happening at all times. So it kind of supports the ongoing activity of your succession planning process, even if you're not updating your bench each moment. But especially looking at the succession bench will be one of the biggest ones, as well as continually coming back and updating your metrics so you can measure progress over time and show ROI to your senior leadership team. All right, it looks like we have another question. How do you differentiate between competencies and skills? This is a really good question. Thank you for asking. So skills tend to be more specific to the skills needed to accomplish tasks. And it tends to be more related to the technical piece of a role rather than the general leading and facilitation of managing a team. And competencies are also wider and have more breadth to them. So for example, if you were a software engineer, a skill might be using different softwares such as C# or Java. So that could be a specific skill, and you really need to have that skill in order to perform your job effectively. But let's say at the same time, you're also leading a team of engineers, then competencies might come into play and might be more and more important. You might need to know how to coach and develop others. You might need a bit of business acumen so you can understand how your team's activities fit into the broader activity of the organization. So these competencies are a little bit more holistic. They're often more about what it takes to be a leader at your organization, and they tend to touch a little bit more on soft skills that are often forgotten in these more technical roles. So what we know is most people are promoted to leadership due to their technical abilities, but 85% of first-time leaders do not receive any leadership training. So this is helping us to balance out the role a bit and a focus on what kind of competencies are needed to have success along with the technical expertise. So I hope that helps to answer that question, but feel free to ask me if you have any follow-ups. All right, I believe that is all of our questions of the session today. If you want to email us with any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. But another note is that if you are here today participating for SHRM or ATD, excuse me, certifications, you can reach out to our contact, Helen, who will be notified of you. So you can reach out, you can grab this email. It's hschroeder@sigmaassessmentsystems.com. So do reach out to her if you need any credit. We would love to help get you this credit, but we will need you to email her. So jot down that email if you need it, please. All right, and that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. And otherwise, you can always contact us for anything else, including if you were interested in the sprint or just browsing our website for any free templates. Thank you so much and have a great day.